In the councils of government, we must guard against
the NFL draft.
Industrial complex.
Welcome back to another edition of the Draft Industrial Complex. Aaron Nagler here with my co-host, with the mo-host, it's Tyler Brooke. Tyler, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Hey, a week from now, we'll be doing one of these in person, I think.
Let's freaking go, baby.
It's my favorite time of year. I got the credential approved. We're going.
Hell yes.
Every year it's my favorite time of year. I mean, the first time I did one of these, I was a freshman at college.
Oh wow.
So I was like
That's
literally
a jump,
18.
right?
Yes. Literally just doing it, had no idea what I was doing. And it's so funny that it's been in my hometown the entire time it's existed. I hope it never moves.
Yeah.
So it's A, great because it's easy travel for me, but B, it's like, in my opinion, I think it's it's probably the most important off-season event, even if you're like a draft fan or not, just like for the league as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. I mean, the Combine has been kind of a touchstone for me as well, as far as it was the first real big NFL event I ever got credentialed for.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing stories about it and being like, I just don't quite get what it is, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I talk to people who aren't involved at all with like the NFL or like my job covering the Packers, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And they, when I tell them I'm going to be away for a week, well, where are you going? I'm going to the Combine. What is that? Oh, where to start, right? But I did think it would be a good jumping off point for us today as far as, what the Combine is, what it is not, why it's still very important, even though you've seen teams around the league starting to kind of keep their coaching staffs at home, where it used to be very much a given that every coaching staff would be there, other than maybe Bill Belichick. But, that change has really kind of solidified here these last few years. But just, the Combine itself, the importance of it. Let me ask you just point blank, like straight out, 30,000-foot view. Why is this still important in an age where everyone's having a pro day? Everyone has access to lots of different information, but they being the 32 NFL teams, still descend on Indianapolis for a week each and every year for this Combine. Why is that?
Yeah, like if we're going even further back, like just the furthest zoomed out view of it, the way I view it, even if you're not even looking at the draft, is like football's version of winter meetings. It is an opportunity for teams, agents, media members, scouts, like anyone who's anyone in the NFL to meet in Indianapolis and, network or reestablish those connections, talk about things that are not related to the draft. Are we bringing this coach in the building? Are we talking to this agent about if the free agent's potentially interested? Things like that. It's a very centralized area and logistically the easiest place to get around to in the winter in the Midwest and East Coast.
No question about it.
Hotels, convention center, and stadium are all connected by tunnels. You do not have to go outside. And I think that's one of the bigger parts and why it's really hard to move it. But if we're talking draft specifically and why it's so important, yes, the athletic testing is a thing. People are opting out of it more and more to do it at their pro days, all of that. But what it's really for is the medical testing more than anything. Indianapolis is home to some of the best hospitals, orthopedic surgeons, anything like that in the country. And logistically, it's just really easy to get these players in and out with their medical evaluations and do all of the other things associated with it. And if we're looking outside of medicals, it's also just an easy way to get interviews. It just goes back to logistics. There's all this stuff that we need to do for 329 players. How do we do that as efficiently as possible for medicals, interviews, workouts, press availability, all of that, and do it in the span of these kids are in and out in like 5 days, and then they stagger them by position. It's why it's in Indianapolis. It's vitally important because we can do the pro day route, but if you want to do that for every single school for medicals,
just imagine booking that travel as a member for each team. Now you got 32 different teams flying all over the country for all these different pro days. That gets hectic.
And they already have to do kind of that during the college football season. But even then, you're only picking and choosing and you have to divide and conquer. You can't do it for everyone. This is the best way to get the 329, theoretically most qualified prospects, even if a few slip through the cracks, get them all in one place and just handle basically all this logistics and admin work almost in a way.
That's
valuable data.
That's a really good point too, because I do think because it's become such a television event, which was, in its inception was never meant to be, right? But of course, the NFL has turned it into a monster tentpole content event, right? And so because of that, I think there's a perception of, you hear a lot about the underwear Olympics, right? The fact that these guys are running around on Lucas Oil Field Stadium, just like going through those athletic drills. Well, it's not real football. They're not going up against the defense. They're not really the whole point of this. And this is where I think it somewhat gets lost because of the presentation by the league trying to make it a kind of primetime event. It's data collection.
Yes.
It's 100% what it is. You just got to think of these guys as each being a line on a spreadsheet, right? And you're looking at their 40 time, their 3-cone, all the different kind of testing they go through. It's not necessarily that they're competing, though you do hear that a lot when it comes to the quarterbacks either throwing or not throwing, and we'll get into that. But it's not a competition. It's a baseline that you as a personnel person can just easily lay out and see how that matches not only to your scouting and what you've done all year film work wise, but also in comparison to not just each other in this draft class, but past draft classes, guys you've got on your roster. It's just a very easy way to have a quick snapshot of a guy's athletic ability. And I think that's what gets lost here.
100%. And I mean, it's guys like Kent Lee Platt who does RAS or relative athletic score. Like, this is his Super Bowl. Like, all this data
truly, right?
and regulation. I love Kent. Shout out him. He's the absolute man. He's a great guy. I'm sure he'll be there, but guys like that for the data collection, whether you're internal in an NFL team or outside, and just trying to basically figure out ways to quantify athleticism. It's great. But my favorite thing is, football is always this battle between analytics and like quote unquote vibes.
It has become that, has it not?
Internally,
no
I'm a huge fan of both. I think both hold very important places. And the combine does just that. We're talking about all the data collection, but these interviews are important too. I think one of my favorite interviews, they aren't usually publicly available, but that one of the Bills meeting with Keon Coleman, and you see how smart this kid is, but also just like how hilarious of a person he is. And like that stuff does matter too to football teams. So
no question.
I think I would still heavily weight the data collection aspect of it. But for some of these teams, getting your entire front office and most of your coaching staff or bits of it in a room with a guy is incredibly valuable as well.
Now, what do you make of, you mentioned coaching staffs, and like I said at the top here, there are more and more staff staying away. I think it really, I mean, obviously I joke about the Bill Belichick thing, who just kind of essentially would obviously be there, but would never make himself available to the media. And that has now kind of turned into, I think it was McVay who really started, like, he kept his whole staff back in LA, and he was like, we can just get more work done here remotely, etc. And then now you've seen there are a handful of teams that do this, including the Packers. The last 2 years, Matt LaFleur and his staff don't make the trek anymore. What do you make of that? Do you think that's kind of where this is headed, as far as it's going to be a strict personnel guy event? Because to your point, I will admit, as a media member, I kind of, I'm not dismayed, but I'm disappointed because it was a great opportunity. Like you said, everyone from the NFL was centralized for a week. I had so many great opportunities to talk to guys on staff and talk about the potential for a player maybe you didn't see all year, because you always hear like, well, they see them every day in practice. What was a great opportunity to talk to, okay, what about this guy that you drafted last year that didn't get on the field a whole lot? Yeah. That opportunity has certainly been robbed. And as a media member, I'm dismayed.
And as a Packers fan, what is Tyron Hopper been up to?
There you go. There's a question.
Yeah, I think I don't know anything concrete, right? But I can have some theories. I imagine the implementation of Zoom in the COVID era has made telecommunication a lot easier for guys to sit in interviews. Does a coach really want to fly all the way to Indianapolis and only be involved in just the interview portion of this when their front office is handling everything? Could also just be a theory of too many cooks in the kitchen. How involved as a GM do you want your coaching staff in these decisions? I'm sure you do a bit, but do you want them just kind of hovering over every little bit of this? And then also, free agency is about to start. These guys are probably trying to work with the pro personnel department as far as free agents they want to target or which guys they want to keep internally. And I know coaches, they're always watching film. I'm sure they are more interested in the film of these prospects than these interviews. Right. For me, I just imagine it's a convenience thing, but it does stink. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago getting to see LaFleur in person, and he is confirmed not going. I would just imagine he's not.
No, they haven't announced it, but I would be shocked if he's on his way. I know we've already set up time with Brian Gutekunst, and we haven't had a mention of LaFleur, so I suspect that's the same. And there's one other kind of wrinkle there that I think is possibly maybe driving some of it. And I do agree that since the COVID era, it's been, oh, that's right, we can do almost all of our work remotely. I think that's part of it. But I think it also allows staffs to stay together and not get kind of networked to another team, as it were. Like, I know a lot of guys come down to Indy who don't have jobs, right? Kind of trying to network and trying to find maybe, a connection or two. And if you're a coach and say, oh, maybe a little bit paranoid, you don't want your dudes mingling all week, talking to people, finding about other opportunities and things like that. I mean, most of these staffs are set by now, but you never know what seeds are going to be planted down the road, right? So I think there's a little element to that as well.
Can totally see that. I mean, I'm still thinking about the Jets D line coach that, worked with Saleh and got interviewed by the Packers and maybe down like a couple years ago at the combine started talking about stuff like that.
You never know. And
I'm sure that happens all the time.
100%. Well, let's get back to the combine itself. And, what everyone's going to be talking about is the prospects. And, the Packers are obviously not in a market for a quarterback, though. You never know. With Brian Gutekunst saying last year he wanted to get back to drafting quarterbacks every year. He's certainly not going to be looking at the top guys, but I do think the conversation during Combine Week almost always kind of gets driven by the quarterbacks and the top quarterbacks in particular. What do you think? Are you hearing anything about these guys possibly throwing at this? Because it seems like every year this is a talking point on NFL Network, and we always hear the old heads say, I want to see a guy compete. And a lot of other people saying, well, totally makes sense to wait and do it at your pro day. How do you think this is going to shake out?
I imagine very few, if any, are going to throw. That seems like the trend nowadays, because I think the biggest fear with these quarterbacks, because they're just so driven by like chemistry and timing, that you want to save the throwing for your pro day, because I think it's an overlooked part of playing quarterback. Rhythm and timing are like number one thing for quarterbacks to throw effectively. And if you're throwing to these combine guys you've literally never thrown to, like you didn't even throw to it like a Senior Bowl or anything like that, it's going to look kind of ugly. And we've seen it before. That being said, like,
every year, no doubt.
Do I want to see Jalen Milroe throw go balls to Tez Johnson? Things like absolutely.
Well, yes,
I want to see the guys with the rocket arms just throw deep balls in person.
Right.
But I totally get why they don't. And like, I'm sure agents have got this down to a formula. Like, listen, you're considered a first round pick. Why create any kind of data point that might add more questions to it than answers, and just save it for the pro day? And like, I think that's what has happened. That being said, there's a couple guys I'm just really hoping at least do workouts, like 40-yard dash, things like that. Not just Jalen Milroe. Like, that's obviously going to be the exhibit A, because dude had 32 rushing touchdowns the last two seasons. I really want to see a guy like Will Howard in this athletic testing. Ohio State. I watched so much film on him after, I got to see him in person in Columbus this year. It was incredible environment and everything like that. And obviously you just kind of get lost when you're at a game. But when I turned on the film of Will Howard, I'm like, this guy can kind of play. He's got a pretty good arm. He is pretty mobile. He's built like a tank. He can, kind of withstand that punishment of playing quarterback in the NFL, and threw some damn good throws. So I'm curious to see if he tests well, so that we can talk ourselves into him as more of a dual threat QB kind of guy. But other than that, this quarterback class, guys, it's so bad. Like, we can talk ourselves into people.
Hard, right? It's hard. And you've hit on something that I wanted to kind of look at, as far as I think, most analysts and most kind of outlets that I see covering the draft have some version of Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders there at the top. But who's QB3? Who, like, after that, it seems to really depend, kind of eye of the beholder, in that sense.
Mine is Milroe still, and we're fighting over that, and he's not having the best pre-draft process. I'll be honest. And too many people are scarred by Anthony Richardson. It's starting to worry them. Jackson Dart's the guy that's getting a ton of attention. I wonder how much of that is propped up by scheme, but I mean, he is talented enough. He is extremely charismatic off the field. I can see where teams talk themselves into. A guy that's really slipping under the cracks that, like, people are going to hate me saying this, but I wouldn't be shocked, and I actually don't think it's the worst move to be QB3, is Quinn Ewers out of Texas.
Man, if that happens, I'm not going to say I'm giving up, but I'm saying the draft industrial complex has struck again. There's no like. That kid shouldn't be anywhere near the first round.
Well, I think he played all of last year very not healthy. He was banged up the whole year. But now there's a whole question of, he does get banged up a lot. His best tape for me has some of the best anticipation throws I've seen, where he's thrown before
That
guys
makes
are even
sense.
getting in and out of
Right.
breaks. He does throw with pretty good touch and can get guys in stride on deep balls, but his arm's not great, and sometimes he relies too much on touch. My comp for him was Mac Jones,
Oh gosh.
which when I'm trying to pitch you on a QB3, I just kind of want to
Yeah.
let you know what the state of this quarterback class is. But it's not
Pretty
even
much-
the lack.
that illustrates it pretty well.
It's not even the lack of depth. It's just like there's also just not that many guys. Like people
Yeah.
are trying to tuck themselves into Tyler Shuck, the Louisville QB, is a first round pick, and I'm like, what are we doing? Like I think that's
Yeah.
the last guy I have yet to watch, and I'm at like 8 quarterbacks. It's just there's not a lot of them in this class.
Well, look, let's stay in the offensive backfield for a
Mhm.
second, because I do think it's interesting to look at some of the conversation around the running back spot,
Mhm.
because I think there's a clear number one there, obviously,
Yes.
in Genty. But after that, again, it's somewhat eye of the beholder. But I also think, and we've talked about this here before, there are so many on offer, right? There are so many dudes who are so talented, and certainly you can, quote unquote, wait on them.
Mhm.
But I do wonder, and wanted to get your take. Do you think because of what seems to be a bit of a tide shift, as it were, in the NFL when it comes to running the football, and particularly the running back spot and the usage of them, is there maybe a renewed focus on the position? And I don't mean like they're all of a sudden people are going to start taking them, with premier picks, or, even, using a day 2 pick, let alone like a bunch of them on these running backs. But I just wonder if this is something where maybe we get a little bit surprised with not just, people paying attention to running back, maybe just how they are valued by NFL teams.
I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I think the teams that were early on it, the Eagles, the Packers, the Ravens, of putting premier assets into running backs in free agency, are clearly big winners because of this quote unquote too high phenomenon. So like too high never existed,
Right.
but teams are so focused on limiting explosive passing plays that it's forcing teams to run the football. So yes, I think it's absolutely important that you have a premier running back, or even a couple. I actually would not be shocked if you see 2 or 3 running backs in the first round, just because of that.
2 or 3, really?
If you're talking tail
Wow.
end of the first round, and someone's like, I want that 5th-year option. If
I
this guy ends
suppose,
up being
right?
a
Yeah.
star.
Yeah.
I
mean, isn't that kind of what the Falcons did with Robinson?
Bijan, yeah,
Right?
and Bijan's awesome.
Yeah.
I really like
It's pretty
Bijan.
damn good.
If you have an offensive line to put up with it, and especially if you're picking late in the first round, you probably have a pretty decent offensive line.
Right?
Yeah. And like guys like Caleb Johnson or Omarion Hampton are guys that can come in right away and be immediately productive. There's other guys, Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, the 2 Ohio State running backs. There's like 18 running backs I've watched, and I like all of them. There's all guys that have very clear roles in the NFL. And I just think there's the top tier of guys beyond Genty.
Right.
Those Hampton, to me, it's Hampton, Judkins, Caleb Johnson. Those guys are all worth first round picks to me. They're that talented. And if Genty wasn't in this draft class, I think we would have more of a conversation of them as late first round picks.
Now, let's look at something a little bit more Packer specific, since we are heading into the combine and there are lots of dudes. I mean, there are lots of guys, lots of names. Who are, to your mind, like a name or 2 or even 3 or 4 that maybe Packers fans should keep their eyes on?
Yeah.
Because, each and every year I get to the combine and I forget how overwhelming it can be. Like there are so many kind of, names, and the idea that each guy is testing, and then you get, oh, he's interviewing, and wait, he's at the podium, and you're just kind of running around. Can you help me focus a little bit? Give me some guys you think Packers fans should be kind of looking out for next week in Indy.
Sure. I'll give you 4 names, 4 different positions. Let's start with the guy I wrote about today so that we can just plug a 33rd team
There you go.
while we're here. LSU edge Braden Swinson. I spent the last 2 days watching him, and I'm absolutely floored he's not considered a top 50 pick by consensus. We talk about speed rushers and we talk about power rushers, right? This is a guy that can do both. And I genuinely mean that. He had 60 pressures in college football for LSU last year. So he's playing SEC football. It's like tied for 6th in FBS in pressures. He had 8.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 6'5", 250, got length. He can run around the edge. He's got bend and dip. He can convert that speed into power. He uses his length well to bull rush. He's like the total package to me as a pass rusher that just needs to get a little bit more disciplined and technically sound against the run. How is that not a top 50 pick?
Yeah, I'm down with that. Totally down with
I
that.
think he's going to test well. I think his measurements are going to really be eye-popping. He he's just going to pop when he's in pads. If you watch the tape, you're just gonna be blown away by him. I think if he tests well, it's going to be a guy that really pops. On the other side of the football, if you're looking at wide receiver, I'm talking about a guy that's going to test well at the combine. To me, it's going to be Jaden Higgins. A big-bodied receiver out of Iowa State. He's got explosiveness to his game. The footwork and technique are really sound. I just think those explosive scores, I'm thinking like broad jump, vertical jump, things like that. I think he's really going to stand out. And if you're looking at another sleeper receiver, Savion Williams out of TCU. We talk about Jack Besh, right? The guy that won the Senior Bowl. His teammate Savion Williams is fascinating because he's 6'5", 225, another explosive outside guy. But he carried the ball like 40 times. Sometimes it's like a true running back in TCU's offense.
A little versatility.
It's the weirdest tape you'll watch because they just play him everywhere. Wildcat quarterback, in line, outside, slot, everywhere. And he's really hard to bring down after the catch. If we're talking defensive line, there's like
which we are this year, my friend. We are talking defensive line.
There's like 40 of them invited. Just pick one and you're going to like them, I think.
Yeah, probably.
But we talked about Kenneth Grant on the show a few weeks ago. I'm fascinated what he's going to weigh in, measure in at. What are his arms like? And if he does test, because if that guy has some good testing at like, what is he? He was listed at 342 pounds. And in his pursuit speed at that size is pretty freaky. I'm very excited to see how he tests. And I'll just give a bonus one. Sleeper first round option for the Packers.
All right.
Donovan Jackson, the Ohio State guard. 5-star recruit out of high school as a guard. Was basically like, you're going to be a guard your entire college career and play guard in the NFL. Suddenly, Josh Simmons, another potential first round pick, tears his ACL.
Got his hurt knee, yeah.
And then they're like, all right, I guess we got to put our career guard at left tackle. And it wasn't pretty the first game or two. And then by the time the playoffs came around, nothing was getting through. I don't think he allowed a sack in the playoff and maybe a couple of pressures. The reports are he had 36-inch arms out of high school, which obviously arm length matters for guys that want to kick out to tackle. I just watched this tape the other day. I'm pretty impressed. He moves pretty well for a guy of his size. And it's the ultimate Packers guy, right? Like a guard that can play tackle.
You move him around, no doubt.
Move him around. So that's just my sleeper pick. And if he tests well and that arm length is confirmed to be over 34 inches long, could see him being Packer, especially taste well on the agilities.
I love it, and I want it to happen only because of the meltdown that will occur.
Another offensive lineman?
Oh, my gosh. People will go insane. I just talked about this with Justice the other day, and I'm like, I would love it. Got to build in the trenches. Daniel Jeremiah, had a great quote today. Said you got to go to the hardware store before you go to the toy store.
That's great.
I am 100% in on this idea of keep building that line on both sides. Again, defensive tackle, I'm all in. Offensive line, I'm all in. I just think it's fascinating to watch people get kind of worked up about possibilities in the first round and then forget the draft is 7 rounds long. The Packers have 8 picks. It's going to be okay if they don't get whatever in the first round. That's what I always come back to because you see the meltdown each and every year regardless.
Day 2 is always my favorite, especially the last few years when I worked with Acme Packing Company. They were like these day 2 targets we fell in love with every year. Somehow the Packers kept taking him. It was really weird.
Nothing wrong with that. That's great.
It was fun. Yeah,
I think Higgins is the guy this year on day 2 as far as that seems to already. I mean, we're so early in the process, but that already seems to be kind of a bit of a name that folks in the Packers fandom and or content creation community are kind of coalescing around. I mean, he's a guy who really pops, no question.
You could draft him, or you could sign MVP magnet Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who has been involved in catching passes in the last 5 MVPs.
You joke, but man, I am all about
Wouldn't
this.
Hate it, actually. If he's for the right price, man, I would take it.
I'm telling you right now, I like that idea for a reunion more than I like the Devontae reunion idea. Because it'll be cheaper. Price?
Totally.
It'll be insanely cheaper, and he gives you the element that Christian Watson has now left wide open in their game on offense. Also, all of that said, he's a baller when it comes to the run game. Like, he is a man outside, like blocking his ass off. So,
and something I always need to make sure he gets credit for, he steps up in playoff games.
Always.
It's incredible.
Always.
Yeah.
I'm like I said, I have no.
He seems like a funny dude too. I like him.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Good vibes. See, there we go. We're blending.
We're back to vibes, baby. Back to vibes. You've got to love it. All right, Tyler. I really appreciate the time, man. We'll be back next week, as you said, live from Indianapolis. I don't know if we're doing a live stream, but we will do we'll have a podcast next week from Indy during the Combine. Really appreciate it, man. I'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, can't wait.